I know you don't believe it, but in this episode, we got the receipts. In the last episode, we named the lie. Today, we count what it cost, and we will share the receipts. This episode is not intended to beat you down, but to build you up, not in feelings, not in regret, not in the comfortable language of, oh, I lost some time and I learned some lessons, but in specific, documented, undeniable receipts. The kind of receipts that do not negotiate and do not allow the man who is still half asleep to remain comfortable in his avoidance of truth. Here's what the lost decade actually produced for the millennial man who believed the mud mythology. He spent his prime networking years when he should have been building, stacking relationships 3 layers deep. He was actually building associations with men who were going absolutely nowhere. And by the time he recognized the era, the networking gap had compounded into a Grand Canyon. He was starting from zero at age 30, while other men were already calling in favors from a decade of intentional relationship investment. He spent his prime learning years actively avoiding the educational frameworks that his mud peer group has coded as selling out, only to discover that at age 32, the credential that he mocked at 19 was now the locked door that was standing between him and the opportunity he was qualified for in every way, except the one that mattered to the gatekeeper. According to the Urban Institute, Black men from stable two-parent households are 70% more likely to at least remain in the middle class as adults than those who are not. And those who additionally complete post-secondary education within a stable family framework will close the wealth gap with white peers by up to 40% within just 2 generations. The family structure was the ladder to success and generational wealth. However, the mud mythology told him to kick that ladder down. These are the receipts. And today, we figure out what to do with them. I'm not just going to leave you in the mud. I'm about to throw you a rope and pull you out. But I need you to reach for the rope and don't let go. This is the Mud Lie, part number 2. Hold tight. Man Thoughts, real truth, real talk, real issue, masculine content, no apologies. In this episode, we start with the 10-year tax, the real cost and the receipts of the identity detour. Let's be painfully specific about what the lost decade cost the millennial man who believed the mud lie. This is not theoretical. These are the receipts. May I remind you that he spent his prime networking years building associations with men who were going nowhere, instead of cultivating relationships with men that were going somewhere. By the time he recognized the era, the men who were building in succession had already built a network 3 layers deep, and he was starting from zero at age 30. He spent his prime learning years avoiding the educational and professional frameworks that his peer group coded as acting different, only to discover that age 32 that the credential he once mocked at age 13 was the barrier that's standing between him and the opportunity he was now desperate to access. According to the Urban Institute, Black men who grew up in stable two-parent households are 70% more likely to at least remain in the middle class as adults than those who do not. And Black men who additionally complete post-secondary education within a stable family framework close the wealth gap with white peers by as much as 40% within just 2 generations. The family structure was the ladder. The mud mythology told him, kick it down. Why? To gain access to the validation economy. Here's the psychological mechanism that made the lie so sticky. The peer group created what behavioral economists call a validation economy, a closed social system in which status currency is earned through demonstrated struggle, distributed through peer approval, and spent on identity confirmation. The young man who successfully performed poverty adjacent masculinity, regardless of his actual circumstances, received enormous deposits of social capital from his peer group. And the young man who maintained stability, structure, and the standards of a functional family received something very different. He received exclusion, skepticism, the accusation of inauthenticity. He was told with social and sometimes physical force that his advantage was a disqualification. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson has written extensively about what he calls the burden of acting right. It is the pressure of young black men from their own communities to perform a version of black identity that is rooted in struggle and not success. That pressure was real. That pressure was powerful. And for an entire generation, that pressure was more influential than any father, any teacher, or any statistic about what the abandoned foundation would cost. The peer group gave him the validation he craved. What it could not give him, which no peer group ever can, is the decade that he traded for it. Our next segment in this episode is reclaiming a lost decade. The recognition is not the failure, but the refusal to pivot is. Here's the first thing every man who has woken up to this reality needs to hear. Recognizing that you believed a lie is not the failure. It is the beginning of the recovery. The failure would be recognizing it, sitting in the clarity of that recognition, and choosing comfort over correction. The man who can look at a decade of misdirected energy and say, I was wrong, I was misled, and I am done building on a fraudulent foundation. That man has more recoverable potential than most men who never had to confront anything at all. Nehemiah rebuilt a destroyed wall in 52 days because he started with an honest assessment of the rubble. He did not romanticize the destruction. He did not defend the debris. He surveyed the damage, he drafted the blueprint, and he built with discipline, daily, and deliberate urgency. That is the posture of the reclaiming man. For the man who left a functional family and a generational foundation in pursuit of peer validation, the first act of reclamation is reconnection. Let me say that again. For the man who left a functional family and a generational foundation in pursuit of peer validation, the first act of reclamation is reconnection. Not with the peer group that misdirected you, but with the root that you abandoned. It may mean acknowledging to a grandparent that the values they tried to transfer to you, the values you rejected at 17 because they weren't street enough, were the very values that would have protected, positioned, and propelled you through everything the last decade threw at you. It may mean going back to the family name, the family faith, the family framework, and receiving what was always there. Waiting with a humility that cost you nothing compared to what the mud detour has cost you over a decade. According to the research from Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest running study on human happiness in history, the single greatest predictor of a fulfilling, healthy, and financial stable life is not wealth. It is not intelligence. It is not fame. It is the quality of close relationships. And the closest, most foundational relationships most men will ever have are the ones that they were born into. To abandon them in pursuit of external validation is to trade a permanent anchor for temporary applause. So, how do we build forward from here? The reclamation does not erase the lost decade. Nothing does. But it immediately begins the compounding of everything that comes after. The man who reclaims his foundation at 30 still has 35 prime years of building ahead. The man who reclaims at age 35 still has 30 years. The window is not closed, but it is not standing still either. Here is your practical mandate. Reconnect to the family network. Activate every relationship, resource, and relational capital that exists within your bloodline. Identify the elders who carry knowledge you have not yet extracted. Audit your peer group with ruthless honesty and replace validation-based relationships with vision-based relationships. Begin the financial reconstruction, not with shame, but with strategic, sustained, systematic urgency, and commit publicly to being the generation in your bloodline that does not let the next young man behind you believe what you believed. The decade is gone. The direction is yours. And the man who builds deliberately from here will outpace in 10 years what would have taken 30 on the road that he abandoned. Here is where the mud lie ends and where your future begins. The mud lie damaged the generation. I declare that damage is not your destiny. Let me say that again. Damage is not your destiny. The correction of a generational lie requires a generational response. You must determine that the statistics are not the sentence. They are simply the starting line. You believed the lie, but you paid the price. And now you carry the truth. And the truth you carry is the greatest inheritance that you can give the next generation coming behind you. In closing, the mud is not the milestone. The mud was the manipulation. Real strength was never in starting from scratch. Real strength is in honoring what was built, carrying it forward, and adding to it with everything that you are. The men who built generational wealth across history were not celebrated for abandoning their foundations. They were celebrated for fortifying them. You may have lost a decade, but you have not lost the thread. The family that built something before you, they're still there. The foundation that was laid before you arrived is still beneath you, waiting to be stood on, built from, and passed forward to the next generation that is watching everything that you do right now. This is Man Thoughts, where you receive real truth, real talk about real issues. I'm your host, Dr. Stacy LeMay, and I will see you at the top, not rising from the mud, but standing on the very shoulders of every sacrifice that made your foundation possible, and building something on it that lasts 100 years beyond your name. I declare the lie ends with your generation, and the legacy begins with your decision. Man Thoughts. Real truth, real talk, real issue. Masculine content, no apologies. Drop a comment. Did you believe the mud lie? What did it cost you? And what did you do when you woke up? Let's have a real conversation. This is Man Thoughts. Like, comment, and subscribe right now. For more masculine content from this channel, click right here.